Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by UR Music and Arts and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded, please turn off your camera and microphone and/or go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which has been placed in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. Tonight, our featured guest is Dr. Indre Viskontas, an opera singer and cognitive neuroscientist. Dr. Viskontas is Professor of Sciences and Humanities at the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, Assistant Professor of Psychology at the University of San Francisco, and Creative Director of the Pasadena Opera. Also joining us tonight is Dr. Robert Greenberg, a composer, music historian, pianist, and since 1993, the #1 best-selling professor of courses made by the Teaching Company. We are also joined by Miss Kaisa Makkonen, an opera singer based in Savonlinna, Finland, Professor Niels Moos, director of the Opera Masters Program at the Music and Arts University of the City of Vienna, Dr. Jerry Davis, a retired neurosurgeon, and Professor Lino Rivera of St. Mary's College of California. At the end of the show, we have a little surprise for everybody. Indre, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us about what were your first experiences with music? What got you into singing? What got you into music? Are your family musicians?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is, I don't remember. My mom is a choral conductor, so I don't remember a time when there wasn't music in our household. I remember sitting under the piano while she was holding rehearsals in our living room. And I remember by the time I was 5 or 6 going on my first audition. She wanted me to audition for the premier children's chorus in Toronto, the Toronto Children's Chorus. And I didn't know what I was doing. But I went and I did my best, and it was a terrible experience. I was told I was not ready. I didn't even get into the, wannabe choir. I was just flat out told, come back another year. And at the time, there was a kind of rivalry in Toronto between the Toronto Children's Chorus, which was very buttoned up and, beautiful sound. They, win all kinds of awards, and the Canadian Children's Opera Chorus, which is where all the people who couldn't get into the TCC ended up. And that's where I found my people, because these were kids who, just wanted the drama, just wanted to enjoy music, just wanted to play. And we ended up being the feeder chorus for the Canadian Opera Company, the top company in Canada. And so by the time I was 11, I was on stage at the Canadian Opera Company in Tosca, was my first opera there. I was played an altar boy, and I was just mesmerized by the whole thing, by the fact that there was somebody who painted makeup on my face, and the costumes were so realistic that they had me put all these undergarments on that were period, but nobody would ever see. And I got to, run around on stage with this huge orchestra and all these singers. And at the end of the night, they handed me the biggest check I'd ever seen. It was like, why wouldn't anybody do this? It just sounded so much fun. So that's kind of how I went from being rejected to finding, this great love of opera.
So there wasn't really a particular music you listened to. It was kind of, you were kind of just immersed in music all the time.
Yeah, especially, I mean, it was mainly classical music. Discovering, I actually remember there was one time when my mom bought a Michael Jackson album, and seeing this, provocative man lying in front of like a white leopard or something just felt like very, I don't know, it was very strange for me. And it I got this sense that popular music was somehow forbidden, or, this just something that is foreign to me. But, so I listened to a lot of classical music. And then even when I was in high school, when a lot of people find their own musical tastes. I certainly did listen to the music of my time. I was a big AC/DC fan. And I loved rap growing up, Belle Biv DeVoe and, Run DMC, which, totally annoyed my parents, which was probably the point. But even when I was in high school, the music that I gravitated towards, that I listened to when I was studying, was opera. And, I think even to this day, which I didn't really realize then, but to this day, I look to opera to help me understand what it means to be human and how the mind works and how we interact. Because there's so much subtlety in opera, and really well written opera, about human emotions. And so I think I used opera for a really big part of my life to help me work through some of the emotions. I didn't see a therapist until the pandemic, really. Because my therapy was my singing teacher and my opera, and that's how I worked out a lot of the trauma and difficult feelings in my life.
So do I
uh,
understand right that you started with music? You had a bad experience for that with that choir audition when you were very young, had a terrible experience, but then everything turned around when you were with the Canadian Opera Company's children's choir, and then it was clear that was what you wanted to do.
It was, but I tell that story in part because that experience, that early experience, was something that stuck with me for a very long time. And I actually think it's one of the great tragedies of the way classical music is taught. I always thought there was a right way to sing. And it wasn't until very recently that I was able to get over that. And so for a long time, I think I was held back by this belief that a performance had to be perfect, and if it wasn't perfect, don't bother going on stage. And that there was one perfect way to sing. And even now, when I pick up music, that I performed in those years, there's a part of me that has to overcome this tendency to listen and judge and think, oh no, you didn't quite get that vowel correct, or your vibrato is just a little bit too fast there. And in order to really perform, you can't have that voice in your head. So I think that's kind of the catch-22 of classical music for me, is that it has this big judgmental thing that I carry around with me and that I've had to overcome, and yet that's where so much joy and love in my life comes from.
And do you think that it does it have something to do with the fact your mother was a conductor, a choir conductor? As we know, conductors, they don't really do anything besides judge other people.
I mean, yes, she was very precise, and we worked on that for a very long time. She was also very mindful of the fact that I was her daughter, and so I shouldn't get any special treatment. So oftentimes when it came to, and yet I was the one who did the most work. I trained harder than anyone else in our community, and so it made sense for me to be the soloist because, I thought I'm the one that, has the skill. But for her, it was always like, no, we have to give, someone else a chance too. And she always reminded me that I'm not Renee Fleming, and all of this part. And I think that was a big part of what I carried around. But at the same time, it also instilled in me a sense that I had to realize that there was always going to be somebody better than me in whatever I did. And so I had to get over that and not worry about just, the accolades or prizes or, setting goals like I want to win the Met competition. I mean, I have no control over that, but I do have control over how well I learn a role or how prepared I come to a rehearsal. And so I developed this mindset where I always want to be the first person off book in a rehearsal. I always want to be the best prepared. I always want to be the person that knows everybody else's parts better than they do. And that work ethic, I think, really helped me in so many different aspects of my life, including science and, including some of the other things that we'll probably talk about later, why I was able to sort of carve out the career that I have been able to, was in part because I realized the importance of always being the most prepared.
So Indra, tell us about when you decided really it was going to be a professional thing, because as I understand it, you went You decided to do higher educational studies in psychology and French literature, and then you went into singing. Is that how it went?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, as I mentioned, I loved singing and so forth. But because my mother also had seen her struggle being a musician for a living and how hard that was. And I also had this aptitude for science and math. And so everyone said, you should just go into medicine. And then, you'll have a nice, be easy life. I mean, right? Yeah, doctors have it easy. But, that you would have a career that was solid. And when your parents are immigrants and you come from no money, that's something that's pretty important, more important than finding your joy or, finding fulfillment. It's putting food on the table consistently. So I started reading the works of Oliver Sacks, who's the poet laureate of neuroscience in that way, and so I felt like that psychology could be a way that I could sort of bridge these two sides of myself, the human side, the artistic side, but also the scientific mind. And so when I finished the undergraduate degree, I also realized that I had never really given singing a chance, and that there are people who were my age who were, doing singing, and they seemed to be okay, and they figured out how to eat and how to put a roof over their head. So instead of going to graduate school right away, I took a year and I moved to London, and I worked at the Royal Opera House as an usher. So 6 nights a week, I was watching opera. I was riding the elevator with Juan Diego Flores and Russell Braun and, all these amazing singers, and watching them and listening and taking lessons. And it was in that time when I realized that anything you do in your 20s, whether you're an opera singer or, anything you do, is about training your skills, because you are still at the bottom of the totem pole, even though you have a college degree. Right? That's like the secret nobody tells you when you're going to college. They think, oh, you've got the college degree and now you're done. But no, you're just starting. So I thought that doing a PhD, which I got a scholarship for at UCLA, would allow me to keep singing, because I thought it was going to be just like undergrad, where I had lots of free time. I didn't. That was a mistake. Graduate school is not like undergraduate, and you don't have as much free time. But I was with this mindset of always, being the most prepared. I made sure that I was the one who published the most, who took on the hardest projects, and so that in the summertime I could go sing. And during my PhD, I spent multiple summers in summer opera programs. And during the year, I kept training. And so I felt like I kind of kept pace with my colleagues who were, doing music full time, because I sort of had these other experiences. And so when I graduated, I vividly remember I gave the valedictorian speech at my PhD graduation. And I basically told everyone there that I was not going to go into neuroscience after all. I was going to go and be a musician, which was a little bit shocking, I think, to my professors. And so that's when I went and did a master's in voice performance at the San Francisco Conservatory. And while there, I really found my niche, because I realized that very little science has trickled down to classical music training. And people who are interested in classical music training are really interested in the science, because we're precisionists. It's like about developing a skill with a precision instrument and learning to hone it. And there were decades of work in psychology and neuroscience on how the brain learns and remembers and changes that wasn't being applied. And so that's what I ended up doing now as my career, and luckily I found a way where being a performer and now a director informs my science, but also informs my ability to bridge that science into an artistic place in terms of, how I approach music and the brain.
So, Indra, I want to bring in our guest, Kaisa Makonnen, in a second. But I just want to ask you then, as a follow-up, this psychology, if I understand correctly, led into the study of cognitive neuroscience. What interested you, and tell us a little bit about the work you do today with the brain and with music and development.
Yeah, so at the time I was really interested in autobiographical memory, the type of memory that we use to remember, who we are, to write the narrative of our lives, to remember events in our lives. And I really wanted to understand how the brain accomplishes that, because I felt that if I understood how our identity is created on the basis of our memory, that would be a great tool to use to bring into character formation in my performances, because I felt like I would have an added layer of understanding of a character and how their identity is a reflection of their experiences. And basically in an opera, as we see a particular set of events unfold, I felt like I could, do something interesting about how I embody that. So I studied autobiographical memory, and then because learning and memory was sort of my main area of expertise, I became really interested in how the brain changes with musical training in particular, because a musician's brain is a model of neuroplasticity, the way the brain changes with experience. And so, and there are a number of reasons for that we might talk about a bit later, but that was really interesting to me, is to sort of harp on this idea that the brain is not a static computer. It's a malleable biological organ. And so what you do with it and how you use it, and what motivates you, all of that is really important in terms of what it will be able to do in the future. And also, I really wanted to push back against this idea, especially in classical music, that you're either talented or you're not. This very sort of fixed mindset that a lot of students who come out of classical music training develop, that, they're told they're talented, they have a gift. And that completely ignores the facts, first of all, but also their experience. Because I remember, I'd come off of stage and somebody would say, "That was so beautiful. You were so lucky to have this gift." And I think, what about all the hours I put in? What about all the weddings I missed because I was worried about my voice and I had to train instead? And, I never went on vacation, for decades because I had to work at this. And so it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like something that I had developed. And when you look at the brains of musicians, that's very clear. Over time, you make these tiny incremental changes that ultimately end up in their whole being a completely different brain. And that's what's exciting to me now.
Amazing. And we had 2 weeks ago, Deshaun Burton, a bass baritone from the Bronx, and he specializes in Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. That's his big role. And he told me, he said, when people ask me, what's your secret, or that, it's amazing that you were born with such a voice. He said, well, the difference between you and me is that I practice 6 hours a day, for the past 20 years. So it's quite inspiring what you say, Indre. So let's have a look at Kaisa Makkonen, who is an operatic soprano from Finland. Let's have a listen to her voice, please. Kaisa, welcome. So tell us a little bit about your story. We understand that you had a brain injury, and that is through music that you've been able to heal.
Hi, I study classical music Finland and Vienna. I graduated Vienna master degree opera music. 5 years ago, my study were interrupted when I got sick. Yakatoso arthritis, which led to stroke. My right side paralyzed and speak completely gone. Singing skills remained, thank God. And notes, I know notes, tempo, rhythm, fast and slow, but text easy sometimes. I've been singing and practicing throughout rehab years, and physical fitness good now, but speak improve a lot. But thanks to Vasa concept, I training 3 hours the day and Vasa concept and 3 hours per day. Mari Tynkönen.
I continue. I'm the Vasa concept therapist. So Kaisa is exercising 3 hours a day Vasa concept and 3 hours a day singing. Vasa concept is rehabilitation concept for neurological patients. Inventor of Vasa concept is Dr. Rayu Vasa from India. Vasa concept is totally different rehabilitation concept than other methods, and so are the results. Results are amazing also with Kaisa. You can see Kaisa's before and after video from YouTube on name Kaisan Vasa concept kuntoutuminen. You can find it from words Kaisa Vasa concept also. The English version is coming, and I can add the link on the chat if you want to watch it. But now back to Kaisa's story.
Yes, I think singing and learning long areas help my story, talking. And singing saved my life and future. I secondly the same person, maybe little bit wiser. And today performed lots of concerts and pianists and orchestras.
Wonderful. So, Indre, I believe, you've written about how music and singing and musical activity can help the brain, like you said, the elasticity get better. Have you worked with people like Kaisa, and what do you think about her story?
I mean, her story is amazing, and it's a testament to the work that she's doing, and I don't want to diminish that in any way. But also to say that she is not alone in that she is able to retain musical function when the left side of the brain, which it seems like that's where the stroke was, given that the right side of her body was paralyzed and her language areas were affected. That when that happens, what's wonderful about music and singing in particular is that it is represented in multiple circuits in the brain. And so if you have a specific injury, but that's not true, language is much more localized to the left side in most people. So when you damage the left side, you can then still retain some of the other aspects of how music is represented. It's a little bit, it's not true to say that music is entirely a right hemisphere function. As Kaisa mentioned, some aspects of text learning, some aspects of some aspects of music still rely on the left hemisphere. But there's an added reason I think that music is particularly effective, and that is because it's closely tied to our emotions and our motivational system. And so when we access that system, music can provide us with a kind of pleasure and a joy, and it's reflected in our neurotransmitter levels. It's reflected in what the brain pays attention to and how quickly it changes. And so it can be a very strong tool that we can use to rewire the brain. So even if perhaps right after injury, if it's a discrete event like a stroke, you don't have some of those functions. Music can serve as a way to help speed up the process of recovery and of rewiring. So that's some of the work that I talk about in my book, How Music Can Make You Better. These stories of people who use music as a tool in many different ways. I mean, for some people, it's not as direct as using it to communicate when language has been affected, but more like giving them the motivation to do the work that they need to do in order to rewire their brains.
Kaisa, so you say that music saved your life. How was singing before your injury, and how is singing after today?
Singing relaxing me, really. Not the same, but two person grow into it, and motion, really motion.
And we hope, Kaisa, to have you return to the opera stage also, because that we're waiting for you and that you have a place there, and so we look forward to welcoming you back to the stage. And thanks very much to Professor Niels Moos, who was a teacher of Kaisa. Niels?
I'm
Okay.
here now. Yes, I also want to say hello to Indra. I'm so happy to hear what you just told, because I've actually never spoken to a professional about these things. But Kaiser was a student of mine when she had the stroke. And when she came a year later, she came to me back. That was the first time I saw her. And she said, Niels, I want to see you again, and so and so. But I cannot speak any Finnish language any longer. At that time, she could only speak German and English. And then I remember my mother, who had a stroke, a very severe stroke also. I remember that she, as Indre, you also mentioned, she could sing, but she couldn't talk. So I decided with Kaiser that we met every week for a year, and we only went through Finnish songs. In order to, I thought it was a terrible thing not to have command of your mother language. And I was so happy to see how it slowly got better. And that way, maybe we could be a little part of the rebuilding of Kaiser. And I must say, her example fills all in the program. We all supported it, and it fills us all to see her strength with the utmost humility and respect.
So Indre, is this a common story you hear?
Well, I mean, it takes work, right? It doesn't, as both Niels and Kaisa mentioned, it's not like you can just switch and start singing in the language that you've lost and then be able to speak again. So that whether a person has access to and it helps very much to do the work with a therapist or with someone like Nils, who is very mindful of a practice of how training works. And to help, because it can be very frustrating, and I think a lot of patients tend to give up because it's very hard. It's very hard work, and it's very frustrating. But I just want to tell you a little bit about the neuroscience of it, because that's what I get really excited about. And so in the left hemisphere, there are these two regions in the brain that we know are specific to language. One for language production, actual speech, and one for language comprehension, how we understand language. And there's a tract of fibers of the axons of neurons that connects the two so that they can communicate with each other. So when I want to say something, I have to first understand what you said. So it goes into my comprehension area. then I need to think of a response, and I need to send that information to my production area so that I can respond to you. And that's where in a lot of cases, the problem is if you have a stroke, I mean, you obliterate a lot of those regions, but including that arc. So in most of us where we have language on the left side, that arc is thicker on the left side than on the right side. And that's not true, though, of singers, of especially professional opera singers. Professional opera singers, with their training, thicken the arc on the right. And we actually see more connections between, on the right side, between these similar areas. And that's because when we're singing, we need to hear and think of what it is that we want to sing, and then we need to produce it. And so it's a similar process, but it includes music, and that's why we think it's more of a right hemisphere function. What we see in patients like Kaisa is a thickening over time with therapy of the right arc. And so that's how, in a way, it can bypass, and that's how we can see this rewiring happen over time. And that's really exciting to me because music can be used as a way of basically changing the anatomy of the brain so that it can do something that the patient wants it to do.
Incredible. So I'd just like to bring in quickly Dr. Jerry Davis, who spent his whole career as a neurosurgeon. And I understand that his family all are musicians, one of them a professional violinist, and that music has been the most important part of his family life. So Dr. Davis, tell us about what are your thoughts on all of this?
Thanks, Simeon, and hi to everybody. I was just listening to Indre, and I just had a question for her. Have you noticed any difference in people depending on age when they have an injury or a stroke?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that what we see in general is that the younger you are, the more quickly the rehabilitation happens, the more effective it can be. The problem is that the sample sizes are still really small, and most people have strokes later on in life. And, you know, in that case, too, there could be a number of reasons why that, you know, the therapy is either not adhered to as much or there are other issues. So most of the cases that I know of where we see sort of this effect is in people who are on the younger side, middle-aged but younger. But I think there are a lot of factors when it comes to what's happening when a person has a stroke later on in life that, you know, can be obstacles to being able to do this. But I don't know that there's any reason why it wouldn't ultimately work. And there's certainly evidence that people with strokes, even in their, in their later years, do recover some, function and some language function even.
I would like to suggest to you that you try and work with adolescents or younger people who have been involved in different types of accidents. I can recall myself, and I've been out of practice for at least 20 years for various reasons, but I do follow a lot of the neurology and neurosurgery, but I have other interests at present, but that's besides the point, is that we had a young girl come into the emergency room who was involved in a car accident. She was a passenger, and she came in with her frontal region. I don't remember which side, I think it was the right side. The scalp was wide open, the bone was cracked, and part of the brain was obviously seen and destroyed. And the thinking at the time for most people was, let the poor girl die and, leave her alone. Well, I chose not to do that, took care of her. And I know she's graduated from high school and college now. Of course, I can't follow them anymore, but that gives me the idea, if you could work, and I'm going to try and look up the information about you online, with younger people, you might see interesting changes and more rapid changes in recovery. Although most people say, as you well know, the brain doesn't really heal and regenerate, but I think it does.
Yeah. And you're exactly right. Like a great example, a case in point is kids with hydrocephalus who have sort of water on the brain, where when the younger they are, where they have basically it's an accumulation of fluid in your brain that can
And
eventually damage it. And the younger that you are, that you have this problem, and now what they do is they put a little shunt. I don't know, maybe even that was something that you did, and they get,
we did lots of shunts. Yeah.
right. And so those patients, the younger they are, the better the outcomes. In fact,
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, this is, I think, actually one of the reasons why this myth that you only use 10% of the brain perpetuated, because you see pictures of kids with half their brain missing, but they seem perfectly fine. And that is because it happened very early in life, and their brain was able to, change tracks and compensate for the injury.
Wonderful.
A little sidebar, if I dare throw it in, when you said that 10% of the brain is being used, unfortunately, here in the United States where I live, I think there are a lot of people functioning on less than 10% of the brain, but don't quote me on that, please.
So let's. I wanted to go back quickly before we move on to Indre's work at the Pasadena Opera. I wanted to just quickly, Indre, talk about now you have a lovely family and you've got kids of your own, and I just want to ask you what role it plays in their formation and in your family life.
I mean, it still plays a big role. I sing to my kids all the time. I make even, my kids are 2 and 6, and they've been in group music classes from the time they were 6 months old, because there's lots of nice evidence that these kinds of participatory music classes help them understand gestures and develop social skills, and have various benefits. I tried to teach my son perfect pitch when he was 2.5, because there's a study that came out of Japan that showed that with this particular method, 100% of the kids who finished the method had perfect pitch. But it was so boring that he couldn't sit through it, and I didn't want him to lose his love of music. But I actually still use music even in my own life to sort of help me deal with emotions that happen with being a mom. I never really understood the aria from Suor Angelica, Senza Mamma, until I became a mama. And all of a sudden I realized how beautifully written it is, how pointed it is, and what every note means. So I use it in that way. We listen to music all the time at home. And of course I try to have my kids come and hear me sing professionally when it's appropriate, and all of that. So that's how I use it. But I can give you a little demonstration of like why when I was a teenager I found opera so much more compelling, and sort of how I use it now. If you want. So imagine, I'm going to move away from the microphone to preserve your ears. Imagine that you are a teenager in your in your room, and you've just had a broken heart, or you want your parents to leave your room, and you can slam the door shut, or you can yell at them, or you can say something like, "Temerari, sortite fuori di questo loco, e non profani il letto infausto dell'infame detti. Nostro cor, nostro orecchio, i nostri affetti." Right? Total drama. And you can release all these feelings and be the drama queen, and then go and be the good student that you need to be. Or one of my favorite moments from this aria is the beginning. So I need to move back for this. Come scoglio imato resta, tra i venti e la tempesta, e la tempesta. I mean,
Fantastic.
Indre, do you guys know the story behind that aria? It's a wonderful story. This is from Così fan tutte, and this is Fiordiligi, who's putting up quite a fight. She's not allowing herself to be seduced easily, and the woman who played this role was someone that Mozart did not like, and apparently she had a lot of trouble shifting from her head to her chest, from her low notes to her high notes, and that those constant leaps were, according to people who knew Mozart, a purposeful act to make her look like a goose, because she would throw her head back for the higher notes and then put her head forward for the lower notes. And Mozart apparently just chuckled into his pipe constantly over that. And it's unwise ever to mess with a composer who's writing for you. I think that's the message we should take away from that. It's a great aria, but there you go, a true story.
Yeah, and it's so much fun to sing. Like it's like there's no other physical act that I have discovered that allows me to just release these emotions in such a way that is fun and compelling. And when I need to yell at my kids, I've got those notes to do it.
And you're yelling in Italian, so you're actually adding to their vocabulary at the same time. I think that's great. My grandparents used to yell at us in Yiddish, thinking we wouldn't know what they were saying, but over time you figure it out.
It's true.
Wonderful. So let's have a look at Indre's most recent work, putting all of what we've just discussed together. Singing on the one hand, cognitive neuroscience on the other hand, all together in, you guessed it, opera.
To wish each other a hearty harmonica.
Well, I just want to tell you guys that you're doing an awesome job, and I'm really proud of the work that we put together here. So thank you. Enjoy your final dress rehearsal. It's going to be awesome. Take whatever risks you want, because I can always tell you not to do them again tonight. Sweet. Sure. And have a really great show. Have fun.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've always been pulled in two directions, science on the one hand and music on the other. And then one day I realized that ultimately the goal is the same, which is to understand the human experience. In music, we really look at an individual's experience, and we try to bring that out sonically and find the deeper layers of meaning that words fall short. Whereas in science, we look at the objective truth. So what is true for all of us? Opera is emotion writ large. There's a real moment of catharsis that happens when you go to the opera and you watch these characters experience these profound life-changing events and have these big emotional experiences. That's why I think opera can be such a wonderful cathartic experience, because we literally go there. We have this ability to experience these emotions in a very safe space. We can find those moments where we can laugh or cry with the characters. And with this heightened aspect of operatic music too, the singing,
long enough to lose track of the day.
There's no barrier between the singers and the audience's ears. It's not amplified. It can be a very visceral experience. We literally feel it in our nervous system.
No sense to go counting tragedy.
You can have this experience, feel the catharsis, and then, walk away a changed person. What we consider to be our art is to use our unamplified voice to express these really deep human emotions.
Like a harvest,
If it can come out of the deepest recesses of human emotion, it can be a way of just using the human body unencumbered to express something incredibly deep. You hear the heart crying in a way that is just completely open and vulnerable. I think the most profound and powerful part of opera. So So as a director, I really work to craft that kind of an environment, to give them the tools that they need so that once they get on stage, they can allow themselves to be vulnerable and, you know, give us that experience.
Indre is easily one of the best directors I've ever seen working. She has an incredibly unique perspective as someone with both art and science in her being. She, like no one else, can relate to what the singers are going through. As a singer herself, singers always respond to her with such gratitude.
To me, it's so important to actually keep opera relevant, to include sounds that people will hear from other genres in the operatic space, because I always think of it as a living, breathing art form. And I think that we lose out on what opera can give us if we only look at the past and not at the future.
Fantastic. So Indre, tell us, you are creative director of the Pasadena Opera. We saw the artistic director, Dana, but you're not the stage director. What exactly is it that you do?
So I am the stage director for that show, but I don't want to commit to having to be the stage director for every show. So we thought that creative director was a title that would allow me to play multiple roles within the company as I wanted to. So, I mean, because there's still maybe a time when I want to be on stage as a singer. And so I don't want to sort of have to give that up yet. So, but it's interesting for me as I found working with singers and especially with as a director where I have control over the calendar and the schedule and the rehearsal process, because I have such strong opinions about how rehearsal process can be more or less effective and how it can lead to burnout in the singers or too much judgment or not enough, a sense of comfort on stage. That I've found that being a director really is a way that I can put all those skills together, and it's really satisfying. I feel like I was more proud of the singers in that production than I would have been of myself had I been one of them.
So I'd like to bring in Professor Niels Moos. He was casting director of the Vienna Folks Opera for many years. And I'm just wondering, Niels, what are your thoughts?
Am I there now?
You are.
Okay. No, of course, being a leader in an artistic environment demands a lot of knowledge, background, and I think also what you said, Indra, about talent or not talent. I define talent as being open to the world. And if people can maintain this openness, of course, we suck things in and then we can also give it to other people. And I find that is maybe the most important thing. And I'm sure that Indra, with all her experience in science in a different artistic situations, it must be wonderful to work with her.
I think that's really interesting. I really like that definition of talent, because one of the things that I think talent essentially is what we still don't understand about what makes a skill or performance special. And to define it this way, where it's sort of an openness, I feel like gets us closer to something interesting.
Yes. You see a lot of course, I have seen, generations of singers, of course, and I have responsibility for them. And now I have responsibility for a lot of younger singers here in Austria and also in China. And I see that there are a lot of people, and you have seen the same, I'm sure, Indra, that there are people who come in to a music college, conservatory, and they are the big talents. Mm-hmm. Most of them never make it.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It is quite different things in life. Or we also hear, oh, he's so sensitive. I must say, my experience is in order to have real success in a musical career is that you have to be very disciplined and you have to be very tough.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
that
yeah.
is reality. And
Yep.
and all this sensitive business, it's good if you also have that, if your personality is large enough to how to say, encompass that also. But you have to be a really strong and many-sided person.
Yeah, I mean, I talk about that, the singer's job is not to feel on stage, it's to make the audience feel or think that they are feeling. And sometimes feeling on stage gets in the way of your ability to get the audience to feel and to be convinced that you are having that feeling. And I think sensitivity,
Yes,
be a
yes, of course. Also, the idea is not to play it. The idea is to be it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this applies to all musicians, really.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
If you're a professional musician, it means you've been rejected more in 1 year of your life than most people go through in 5 lifetimes. And to keep your energy level up, to keep your soul intact under those circumstances requires not a lot of lying to yourself at certain times of your life, and a certain one way of thinking that may seem inflexible to people who are not fellow musicians. I'll tell you a quick and a wonderful story because it's something I remember and will remember to my grave. I was a graduate student. One of my composition professors was a gentleman named Richard Felciano. And Richard was very I won't say uptight, but straight-laced. Anyway, it was a Christmas party. Richard drank too much. And, this guy actually started talking to me. And he puts his arm around my shoulders and he says, "Young man, I'm going to tell you the secret. I'm going to tell you the secret." I said, "I'm all ears, Professor Felciano." He goes, "Just don't let the sons of bitches knock you down. Outlast them. I outlasted them all." And there's something to be said there. It's not the talent. Talent only helps get you there, but you also have to be committed and willing to take the abuse, able to take the abuse. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard part. I mean, you can be, I'm sensitive. My wife tells me I'm oversensitive, but clearly I've been able to take the abuse, as all of us here have been able to take it. I mean, Lena Rivera, who's on this right now, is a professional pianist. Oh my God, it's a hard life, mm-hmm. but it's the only life. And there we have it. But we have to outlast everyone. That's the best advice I got in graduate school.
So Indre, let's tell us just about working now with singers after having been one yourself. I mean, it seems somewhat extraordinary.
I mean, I recognize how hard their job is, that you have to give them the tools that they need in order to shine. They can't hear themselves the way the audience hears them, so that's not available to them. They can't see themselves the way the audience sees them, so that's not available to them either. So you have to be their eyes and ears, but you also have to be very mindful of the fact that they are giving up something very deep in their soul. So you have to create an environment in which that is possible and not in which they feel scared or judged. But also I think that the important thing is that a lot of singers now don't have a lot of, well, it's getting better, but they don't have a lot of dramatic acting training. And one thing I love about Pasadena Opera is that we are committed to staying in small theaters where there isn't, the audience is very close to the singer. So I work with them to help their body language and their emotions add to what it is that they're saying and not subtract from it or detract from it. And to also give them insights on human behavior. Because, like, for example, a lot of people think when you're drunk that you need to, act drunk. But the truth is that if you're drunk, what you're really trying to do is act sober. So, if you understand the human behavior, and that's basically what psychology is, it's the study of human behavior, then you can be a more effective director because you can tell them, no, in that moment, I don't want you to struggle to fall. I want you to struggle to stand straight. Fantastic.
So this is like you were saying, Indre, that you like this idea of becoming creative director because really you could use all of that knowledge that you got from psychology, cognitive neuroscience to really put that into the characters and help the singers bring those special things out because you're the specialist in that.
Yeah, and also for the audience. I mean, I don't, I don't want to just limit. It's not just the singer's behavior that makes a show, an opera, great. It's a whole series of things. There's the projections, the set, all of that. And as a person who understands the human brain, I feel like I have a at least a vision for where I want the audience to direct their attention. And sometimes I feel like there is a disconnect between a director's vision for the set and what is happening in the opera. And so I really try to work to, have the set and the beauty and the costumes and everything work together to direct the audience's attention to specific points and not, give them too much distraction. So it's exciting. It's exciting to build something like that with other people. And I really see the director's role as not necessarily having their vision put on stage, but rather getting everybody who works for them to do their best work. And that's about managing people and about, understanding when you can push someone, when you can ask that set designer for one more rendering and not say to them, well, you need to change X, Y, and Z, but say, can you make that better? And let them do it, bring their own creativity to it, which ultimately the product will be better than anything that you would have thought of as one person if you can take a team of 10 people and bring the best work out of 10 people.
Understood. So, Indre, we have, I think, time for one quick question. It's from Facebook from David Villalpando. He writes, can I ask a dumb question? Do you always understand every word you are singing in no matter what language you're singing in? How multilingual do you need to be to sing from the heart for all these compositions?
My answer to that is yes. And not only do you need to understand every word, you need to understand the idioms of that language. So it's not enough to just do a word for word translation. You need to understand something behind the grammar and the way that people use that language to communicate. Because as we all know, a word can have different meanings in different contexts, right? It can be sarcastic, as a most obvious example. So I think that if you really want to be able to give a piece its due, you need to understand what the meaning is behind every word, not just the actual word itself. But having said that, I have sung in Russian, for example, but I don't speak Russian, but I spent a lot of time, or Czech, but I spent a lot of time working with coaches and people who do speak the language so that I understand the many layers that are in that particular piece. So, I personally don't speak Czech, but, I can sing Rusalka because there's enough information out there about what the aria means and what the role means, etc. But I think that, these days, if an opera singer wants to have a career, they need to be fluent in at least 3 languages. For me, it's Italian, French, and English, and rudimentary German. But I think that's a minimum now. And most classical music, opera training programs will demand that you take pretty high level courses in those languages. And then, if you can add, I have Lithuanian as my sort of 5th language, or my first language, really. So the thing is, like, once you learn one language, it's much easier to learn other languages that are related to it. It's not as an exponential a leap.
You're quite right about this. I must say, German is a very, very important language, simply because 90% of all operatic life takes place in Germany.
I mean, I totally agree, and I've studied it for years. The reason I say that I'm still rudimentary is that I just feel like it's a very complex language.
No, but you are sitting in America, and you have to also tell the young Americans they simply have to learn it, because I can tell you one thing, else they don't get a job.
Yeah, I mean, that's totally true. It's totally true.
That is, I have to say it. It's very important.
If I were starting over, I would spend more time learning German than, say, French, for example, although I grew up speaking French, so I didn't really have a choice. But yes, I agree with Nils
In
that
in the German speaking sphere in Europe, there are at least 100 opera houses that play all year round.
Yep.
And that is today, unfortunately, the big market, because other markets have been hit very hard.
Yeah, agreed.
So
May I ask Indre one quick question? Indre, are you familiar or have you heard of the Estil voice training method, which is the scientific way of teaching voice?
Yes, and I have to say I'm not convinced that it is based in science. I think that there are some scientific fundamental principles, and I think that, but I also don't think that there is one single way that we can teach a person to sing, because of how closely tied the voice is to early experiences. That students will come with different understandings and different problems. And so I'm not a fan of saying there is one correct method. I think all methods should have more scientific analysis and testing as we go through it. But that can be very hard to do because we still don't have an objective measure of what makes a good singer. There's still a subjective component to it. So that's, I think, something that we need to think about. But I think that there are lots of tools now that we can use that can provide us with more information, more feedback, whether it's looking at, the frequencies of sound that come out, the spectral envelope, we can look at all these tools, and they can be helpful for some people, and people can get obsessed about it and it not be as helpful. But I do think that just like there isn't one method of teaching reading to kids, there are multiple methods, and some are better than others. Some have more scientific foundations than others. There will never be one method of teaching singing, but I think that all singing training would benefit from more objective and scientific tools being applied to them.
Good. So I have very good news for everybody who has a question. It's that we are going to see now how we can stay in touch with Indre. So Indre has her own website, believe it or not, indreviskontas.com. There it is. And let's see how we stay in touch with her part. I believe her email is right there. And
yeah, contact me on the right. You can fill out a form and that goes straight to my personal email.
Wonderful. And so, Indre, it's okay. I imagine that people with all of their many, many, many questions can reach out to you tonight. Is that okay?
Sure, please do.
Wonderful. So there you have it. We can how to stay in touch with Indre, and she's willing to field all of your questions, comments. There it is. Get in contact with Indre Viskontas in the chat box, indreviskontas.com. So I'd like to bring your attention to next week. We have Wednesday, October 14th, Brian Lindgren, classically electronic. What exactly is electronic music, and how can it intersect with the Western so-called classical music? Yes, it can, and Brian Lindgren will show us how. He started his musical journey with classical music and eventually became a professional violist. Then, abruptly, his career took a turn and he decided to become a professional, quote, electronic musician, end quote. Today, Brian lives and works in New York City, where he owns a successful music production company, the music of which is streamed by millions, and the clients of which include not only legendary rappers, but also Fortune 500 companies. So let's have a very nice welcome to our community. Welcome, Brian. So at this time, then, we need to thank very much Indre and thank everybody else.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Indre. And
wonderful.
Yes, and we have, excuse me, I'm sorry, we have a small surprise here.
Tenor from Colombia. Thank you, Indre and Kasia, for those inspiring stories. And I'm here only to say hello and to tell you that I've been living in Paris for many, many years, singing in Europe, in France most of the time. And because of this pandemic, I've been for the first time in 20 years in Colombia for 7 months, and I discovered a treasure, uh, a brown treasure, these coffee beans. We have coffee plantations since 4 generations in the family, and I've been living these 7 months in the coffee farm, and I just finished my coffee. And we want you to discover that, to try that coffee, and we will have a surprise for you soon. Next time, in this next show, we will be showing you the landscapes and the process of that coffee and those beans, sun-dried and roasted in a very mild way, so that we have all these aromas, flavors, and scents of our coffee. And by the way, Indre, happy birthday. Cumpleaños feliz. Cumpleaños
Feliz.
cumpleaños
Anniversaire, Indre. Joyeux anniversaire.
So, thank you very much to Indre. Thank you to Keiza Makonnen, to Dr. Bob, to Professor Niels Moose, Dr. Jerry Davis, Professor Lino Rivera, Juan Carlos, to our superhero production team, and most of all to you, our participants, without whom none of this wonderful stuff would be worth it. So from Vienna, from Savonlinna, Finland, Vienna, Austria, Manizales, Colombia, Minneapolis, Minnesota, and the Bay Area, California, goodbye and see you next Wednesday.